NHCSR here. I'm going to start sticking these field reports into the series Grower Feed during the growing season to give you some real-time reports from our extension specialists in New England, New York, and the Mid-Atlantic states. Look for links to resources from extension educators in your region in the show notes and pay close attention to where some of these reports are coming from because we're covering a very wide region. And please reach out if you need help connecting with your local extension specialist wherever you are because we will get you hooked up with the right expert in your area. Each of these field reports will start out with the most time-sensitive reports from what folks are seeing on commercial vegetable farms, and I will take care to specify when I am talking about tunnel-grown crops, otherwise assume I'm talking about open culture. Okay, top line reports for June 17th, 2026. Colorado potato beetle continues to invade potato and eggplant crops across the region. Leek moth has been reported to be in its pupal stage in Vermont. We are still hearing reports of little physiological weirdsies that we are blaming on extreme temperatures throughout the spring, including some cauliflower with small heads, some purpling, raciness, weird textures, little weirdsies. Folks who were out there assessing their garlic crops recently are reporting that things are looking very nice, some good necks, so there's some good news for you, and I hope you are also seeing healthy necks in your garlic too. Sweet corn pest trapping networks are up and running across the Northeast. Please reach out if you need help finding your state's monitoring data. New Hampshire, Massachusetts, and Pennsylvania are reporting that European corn borer activity is ticking up. Larval feeding can sometimes cause stand loss for young corn this time of year. Corn earworm, which lays its eggs in silking corn, and those larvae bore down into the corn ear, has been reported in low numbers from monitoring networks in New Hampshire, Massachusetts, and Pennsylvania, as expected. And networks in Delaware and New Jersey are reporting earworm moths in the double digits in some locations, but very low numbers in others. So a very good demonstration of how much better risk assessment is when monitoring is done in the susceptible crop you're trying to protect. Regional monitoring data can help, but reach out if you want to get into doing this on your own. Reports of potential Asiatic garden beetle foliar damage have been reported in bean and cucurbic crops. This is a scarab beetle, cousin of Japanese beetle, and both have larval stages we call white grubs that eat roots and cause damage below ground, and both will eat leaves above ground and cause damage above ground. But the Asiatic garden beetle is more likely to go unobserved because they feed at night. Foliar feeding patterns may vary from crop to crop, but they're described as more ragged than skeletonized, like the damage caused by Japanese beetles who eat out the soft fleshy tissue of the leaf, leaving behind the veins. It's kind of splitting hairs to make the distinction in feeding, but either way, you'll have to go out with your headlamp at night to scout for this beetle in order to catch it red-mandibled. New Hampshire's Pest Monitoring Network reported its first squash vine borer adult of the season. These day-flying moths lay their eggs at the base of squash plants, and larvae bore into stems and feed. You may not notice the damage until much later, but plants will start to fail, look wilty, and then you examine the stem to find small holes in the base or the joints of the stem, accompanied by moist, greenish, orange, yellowish sawdust material. This is the bug poop. This is the frass spilling out from that larvae that's feeding inside. For smaller scale operations, row cover or insect netting is commonly used to physically exclude these moths from laying eggs while adults are active. These moths are easily controlled with pesticides if those pesticides are timed correctly, but growers who opt not to use pesticides will opt for the grow enough for everybody strategy. Oftentimes we see more of an impact in very small scale places like gardens where, your one or two plants is going to be impacted a little bit more greatly than larger acreages. As far as resistant varieties go, pretty much all of our summer squashes, acorns, delicatas, and pumpkins are pretty susceptible, although some varieties will grow more vigorously and tolerate some pretty heavy-duty infestations. They say Cucurbita moschata species are more resistant than the other Cucurbita species. So, for example, Trombosino zucchini might be a good stand-in for your summer squashes, and butternut squashes could be a good alternative for your winter squashes. But I would love to hear from you if you have any feedback about what good stand-ins are for the varieties you like to grow. Maybe you don't like Trombosinos. For folks who are not organic but want to avoid flaring spider mites or other pests when you use broad-spectrum pyrethroids, we are hearing products containing chlorantraniliprole, the product name is actually Coragen, provide excellent control for squash vine borer. And a big thank you to David Owens at the University of Delaware for conducting this research. This active ingredient, the one in Coragen, works on a receptor that only exists in insects. And this particular active ingredient is really only effective on caterpillars. So this product is safe for beneficial insects like pollinators and the natural enemies that help us to avoid those secondary pest outbreaks like the mite flares. I do want to mention price here because Coragen is one of those products that is only sold in gallon jugs, and the price on that is kind of breathtaking. I think it was something like $1,000 for a gallon the last time I paid any attention. However, this product is registered for use on most vegetable crops, and it is finding its way into very important places, including finding its way into sweet corn spray rotations in very valuable ways. Research from the Corn Earworm IPM project has been confirming something that all of us entomologists thought must be true. Starting off your spray rotation for corn earworm with this selective material rather than a broad spectrum pyrethroid is providing better control than using, the broad spectrums across the board, because it saves natural enemies that eat these corn earworm eggs before they hatch, like those adorable minute pirate bugs. If you've never looked in a corn silk for a minute pirate bug, I recommend you try it. It's kind of easy to find them. We all know that bees love the pollen that is likely still shedding at this point in the sweet corn cycle, so it's obviously preferable to use a product that contains this selective material over one that contains a broad spectrum, and some products that use a blend of those. However, this could also mean fewer sprays compared to the traditional rotation. I know the research team is working on some improvements to threshold recommendations and some really helpful economics here, so stay tuned for more and check out their website, which I have left a link in the show notes. First reports of tomato hornworm adults came in from New Hampshire, and folks in Pennsylvania are already seeing hornworm caterpillars on high tunnel tomato. The adult moths are night flying, so chances are pretty good you will not encounter one of these baddies in the field unless they get themselves trapped inside of a tunnel. They're pretty big, and I've heard it can be like getting a bird trapped in a tunnel, so it can be a little woo. Products containing BT, like dipel, will provide good control of young hornworm larvae. So it's important to keep your eyes peeled for those eggs and small larvae, because those products will lose efficacy once the caterpillars get quite big, and they can get quite big. This product is very selective, so you also know it will not disturb the natural enemies that help you control insect pests. If you are relying on handpicking as your control tactic, make sure to start incorporating scouting for these larvae as part of your pruning and training routines, starting now and continuing through the summer. Something else that may be kind of unique to high tunnel tomato, but we're continuing to hear reports of, is leaf mold on high tunnel tomato. Tomato crops can typically handle a pretty bad leaf mold infection that won't impact yield, and we don't concern ourselves about leaf mold infections in open culture. However, we're starting to see yield losses to leaf mold in high tunnels more frequently than in open field culture. Either way, it's still a little early to be worrying about tomato diseases writ large, but a good time to cover some basics on distinguishing leaf mold infection caused by the fungus Passiflora fulva from tomato gray leaf spot caused by several Stemphylium species. I'm including a resource from Caleb Goossen from Maine Organic Farmers and Gardeners Association as he describes the growing concerns over gray leaf spot in New England states, as well as how to distinguish those infections versus those caused by bacterial pathogens like the blights that might raise some real serious alarms if you start seeing some of these symptoms this time of year. I will quote from his resource: "I've started to think of it as acting like early blight, but infecting like botrytis, One fortunate difference is that gray leaf spot does not affect tomato fruit the way that early blight or botrytis can. However, it is likely cold comfort if your plant has lost all of its leaves. So check out that resource if you are seeing something that you think might be new, you're worried it's a blight, you're hoping it's not a blight, and as always, make sure to get diseases confirmed with your local plant diagnostic lab if you think you're seeing something new or you think you're seeing signs of something devastating to come, because it might not be that bad. That's it for today, but please reach out if you have any questions or suggestions for what you'd like to hear more about, and thank you so much for listening.